Howdy, and welcome to LeeReads, where I talk about the books I've been reading and enjoying lately. I know recently I said that I don't do a lot of tags, but it is the middle of the year, so it's time for the Mid-Year Freakout Tag. I do this every year. It's a fun way to look back on what I've read so far this year and think about what I really want to get to at the last half of the year. There are about 13 questions. I'm sure you've seen this tag before. What is the best book that you've read so far this year? I think I have to go with Blood Over Bright Haven, which I read last month. If you caught my wrap-up of that video, you heard me say that it's a must-read, and I truly wish that most people would give this book a try. It's an adult fantasy standalone, so it packs a really good punch in a standalone package. It's a story about a city, but following the perspective from a young woman who loves magic and wants to basically study how magic works, but is fighting against some sexism in the magical institutions of the city. However, she earns her place in this lab and starts working on this very big project. But some of her colleagues don't necessarily want her to succeed, and she gets assigned a janitor as her assistant instead of a trained assistant. She winds up training this assistant and how to use magic so that he can help her solve this problem. But it's more complicated than that. The assistant is from a tribe of people who, he's one of the last ones left. He barely survived trying to make it to the safe haven that the city is, because outside the city, this horrible thing called blight indiscriminately kills people, plants, and the environment. And how that melds with the problem that the magician is trying to solve is just riveting. The relationship between the main characters, the conflict they have, how they learn to trust each other. It's a very compelling story that has a lot to say about society as well. And again, I would encourage you to pick it up. It was originally self-published, but it's been picked up by a publishing house, and it's actually coming out later this year. I've already pre-ordered my copy of that hardcover. Second question, the best sequel that you've read so far in 2024. It has to be The Trials of Empire by Richard Swan, which is the third book in the Empire of the Wolf trilogy. I just knocked my pile of books over and it messed with the camera. The Empire of the Wolf begins with Justice of Kings and then is followed by Tyranny of Faith. And I think each book in this trilogy gets better and better. It starts out where you're following this emperor's justice. He's like the judge, jury, and executioner traveling the countryside. The story is told from the perspective of his scribe, Helena, who sort of worships him but begins to challenge him as the story goes on and is learning from him. And it really morphs into something a little bit darker. Each book in the series really grows. When I finished the trilogy, I just felt exhausted after all that we had been through. The questions about morality and privilege and what you will do to protect something that you care about and the people that you care about, it's just there's a lot going on in this trilogy, and I highly, highly recommend it. What is a release from earlier in the year that you haven't read yet but want to? And for me, that is The Fall of Waterstone, the sequel to A Flame in the North. This is a Norse-inspired epic fantasy that it really feels like it's paying homage to The Lord of the Rings. Like the writing style, it's a little more formal and distant than modern fantasy writing, and yet I still got really connected to the main character, and even some of the naming conventions in the world and the enemies, it really reminded me of Lord of the Rings, but it's not a very derivative plot. Like there's fresh new things going on within the story. It follows a young woman who is an honored sorceress in her family and her kin, but after her brother does something extremely foolish, she has to kind of repay that debt and gets sent to live with this group of visitors from the north for a year and a day as like a weregild as a punishment. Soon learns that they might have been looking for her because there are much greater, darker plots unfolding, and they desperately need her help. And that's all I really want to say so that I don't spoil anything. But I'd really like to know how The Fall of Waterstone continues the story. What is your most anticipated release for the rest of the year? I think it might have just come out, but I haven't gotten my copy yet. It is The Bound Worlds, the final book in the Devoured World trilogy. This is a science fiction trilogy beginning with The Blighted Stars and followed by The Fractured Dark. The world building and the horror elements within the world building are just so cool. It has to do with terraforming planets, trying to find places for humanity to survive, and society is controlled by these very powerful and rich mercantile houses. One of our main characters is the heir of the house that really controls the terraforming technology, but there's a faction of people who believe that instead of saving humanity, this technology is ruining those worlds, and they're setting out to stop it. When the heir of this house and one of the key players in that rebellion crash land on this planet, they have to work together to survive. Only the revolutionary is keeping her true identity a secret, and she's posing as the heir's bodyguard, and the story goes from there. I've been really enraptured by this trilogy, and I'm happy that they've released them so quickly. Biggest disappointment so far is Letter to the Luminous Deep, which I recently began and DNF'd. This, I was really hoping I would get something like something similar to Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies, where it's told epistolary or in letter format, but following the mystery of what happened to these two scientists who were studying something in this underwater habitat, and it's the scientist's brother and sister who are working together to figure out what happened. Unfortunately, it's just the style of how the letters are written and how the characters are talking to each other, I found a little bit too stilted. Like, there's a lot of info dumping in the forms of, well, as you know, this, and this, and this. It's like, it feels unnatural and like it's trying too hard to get the reader caught up and to understand what these characters should already know. And so unfortunately I sort of bounced off of it before I got very, very far. I selected this for my Our Fantasy bingo card for a story having to do with water set beneath the sea, things like that. So I'm gonna have to find a new book for that prompt, unfortunately. Biggest surprise of the year so far? I would say Blood Over Brighthaven, but I don't want to reuse a book. So I'm actually going to say Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This is an urban fantasy romance. It's a departure from her usual contemporary romance about characters involved with STEM. This definitely is playing with common urban fantasy tropes, and I don't normally read that, especially when it gets into like Omegaverse stuff. I really liked the characters that she wrote in this story. It's basically an arranged marriage between the leader of the vampire's daughter and some like really, really powerful alpha of a werewolf pack. It's not my normal thing, yet the characters got me invested. Favorite new author? I'm going with Robert Jackson Bennett because I really liked The Tainted Cup. However, this is the only Robert Jackson Bennett that I've read, but I know people love Foundryside and the City of Stairs. The Tainted Cup it's styled as a Watson and Holmes-esque murder investigation set in a very weird, wildlife-heavy fantasy world. And my favorite part about the story was actually how the world building and those speculative elements really impacted the plot. It wasn't just a straight murder investigation. There was layers of other stuff going on. But I think if you read fantasy and are interested in reading mysteries, or vice versa, if you don't normally read fantasy, this would be a good gateway between them. Newest fictional crush? I never answer that question. I don't have one. Newest favorite character? I'm gonna say Rex from Dogs of War by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Rex is a super soldier based on canine stock, and Rex just wants to be a good dog. He has to follow the orders of his masters, and he starts questioning, am I a good dog? Is Master a good person? It just made me really attached to Rex. And if you like Adrian Tchaikovsky, I think Dogs of War would be a great military science fiction to try. Book that made you cry? I'm not sure that there is one yet so far this year. I have been reading a little bit of fan fiction throughout the year, and some of those have made me tear up. But there's not one of my traditionally published works that's done that yet. I'm sure it will happen, just hasn't happened yet. Book that made you happy. This is a departure from science fiction and fantasy. It's actually Thursday Murder Club by Richard Osman. This story follows a group of older people in a retirement community that get together on a Thursday to look into old unsolved cases, because one of the founding members of this little club used to be an investigator. When some murders start happening near their community, they pitch in to try to solve the murders, much to the chagrin of the local police. It's just delightful, it's funny, and there's a whole series that I plan on reading. The most beautiful book that you have bought or received so far this year. This has to go to this edition of The Hobbit that I recently found at Half Price Bookstore. It is leather in this wonderful case with the script along the side. An illustrated edition by Tolkien. So we have the maps. Bilbo comes to the huts of the Raft Elves. And other illustrations throughout. I was very surprised and happy to find this. And the last question, what books do you need to read by the end of the year? Well, I have plenty of physical copies of books I've recently purchased that I want to stay on top of and read my physical TBR. But a book that's coming out that I'm really looking forward to is The Mercy of Gods by James S.A. Corey. Those are the authors that wrote The Expanse, which was a science fiction space opera that I really, really enjoyed. And this is the first book in a new trilogy, I think it is. I've recently gotten access to the e-arc of it, so I think I'll be starting it soon. But there's plenty of books coming out this year that I'm really looking forward to. And that is it for this year's Mid-Year Freakout Tag. What were some of your favorites and some of your disappointments so far this year? What are you really looking forward to, so I can add it to my list? Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and as always, don't forget to support your local library. Thank you.